I thought it was really appropriate that actually we address the subject of grief, um, which I know is on most of the country's mind at the moment. But it has been on Natasha's mind, especially for the last few years, and a lot of other people. So nice to see you, Tasha.
Hello. Yeah, no, there's sort of like world mourning at the moment for the Queen. So yeah, I think everyone's sort of like feeling a little bit low, because that's what grief brings to the table, really, doesn't it? To start with.
It does. I think you go through so many different emotions, don't you? I know for me personally, it was shock because what happened was very sudden to me with one of the moments of grief I've been through anyway. So shock, and then maybe some anger and some denial, and then you move through different stages like depression and then acceptance and
Yeah.
things like that. But it takes a while, doesn't it? And I think it's slightly less personal when it's someone so massive like the Queen.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, but do you know, a few things I've been seeing on sort of like Facebook at the moment is sort of like because I lost my mum, so I'm seeing a lot of people post, especially in my UK motherless groups and some of my friends saying that their loss for their mums coming up a little bit. So I think sometimes sort of like big grief or big death events like that can bring up your own sort of like lost loved ones and the feelings that you feel towards that, because it's always sort of like they're lingering. It'll be with you for the rest of your life. It's just you learn to ways to adapt around the loss. So but yeah, no, you touched on sort of like the feelings. I remember when I lost my mum, I joined a children's grief charity because my children really struggled, and they had this sort of like picture of grief. Don't know if you can see it. It's basically like two ends and a really big squiggle because it's not linear. So you go through all these emotions like that. You just have no idea what you're going to get that day. You can go from, you know, sadness to guilt to anger to I don't want to believe that today. And yeah, it's never linear. People think that, oh, I'll feel the anger and then I'll go past that stage, but you don't. You kind of go back to the anger, back and forth, and between all those emotions, and it can be really draining.
I know, and especially if your grief comes from a place where you feel that something has happened that shouldn't have happened to cause that death.
Yeah,
So maybe there were tests that weren't run properly, or it wasn't diagnosed at the right time, or the care wasn't there, or it was caused by something like a vaccine. There's a lot of people out there on the other groups who've lost people because of medical reason, misdiagnosis
yeah,
or products or whatever. And that does make you very angry, and it comes in fits and waves, doesn't it? When you feel that death was preventable and you've lost someone because of something that someone else has done wrong, and that provokes that anger in you, doesn't it? And it takes a long while to come to that level of acceptance
yeah,
where you can say, yes, it happened, and now I can deal with it in this way. And
yeah,
for me personally, I think you never stop that feeling of being completely. I don't know if you felt like this when your mum died, but it does. The meaning of the word gutted
yeah,
is so true, because you feel like someone's reached into your guts,
yeah.
ripped them out, and there's just this unimaginable pain in your stomach and your heart and your chest. Or it's physical, it's not just emotional, and
I'm
it
so
just
glad you
feels
mentioned
like
this. Yeah,
and as time goes by, that doesn't get any less. You just learn to be able to put it in a little box somewhere and just take it out when you want to feel it. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. You've actually described that so perfectly because I mean, I have had loss before my mum, and my brother died when I was 10. But when you're a child, sort of like especially back then, it was a shock death. It was he died in a car crash, and quite frankly, I didn't know how to process that at 10 years old, and it came out in different ways to how my mum's death affected me. But when my mum died, I'd never felt physical pain like that. It's like what you just described. It's like someone's reached in and just sort of like gutted it all out of you, and you're just left with this raw pain. And I never knew it could be so physical. Do you know that there was points after she died where I didn't want to live. I sat there and I was like, I can't cope with this kind of pain. And I'd be looking at my husband, he would come home from work, and I'd look at him and say, can you just kill me? Because this is so hard. But I didn't want to die, but it felt like I couldn't go on. It felt that strong, and it affected all aspects of my life. And I think there's an element of shock too, because when someone you love dies, your brain does not know how to cope with that, so it goes into shock. And I definitely went into shock after my mum died. I couldn't function. I'll be staring at walls. I'll be forgetting everything. Even something as simple as sort of like cooking the dinner, I couldn't do. So I needed sort of like a lot of help with everyday life, and my husband did help me with that. But there's sort of like different kinds of grief, and there's different kinds of deaths. And the out of orderly deaths seem to be sort of like one of the hardest. And I think you've experienced sort of like that, haven't you? With regards to your well, not ex, your children's dad. Is that someone dies quite suddenly, and it kind of didn't need to happen. So, and there can be a lot of anger, and you don't understand sort of like why, where, when, and it can be really hard to get through that.
Did you have, I know I went through a long time where I would actually dream about him. So I had a lot of dreams about him, and I also would be walking down the road. I remember one time, it was probably about 6 months after he died, and I was walking down the road, and there was other people walking down the road, and I swore he was about 10 meters in front of me, and I almost ran to try and catch up to this person, and then sort of nonchalantly walked past, and it wasn't him, of course, but I kind of had this, oh my God, is it true? Did he not die? And is it but it's funny how your mind does this to you.
That's something someone warned me of. Yeah, on my mum's funeral, there was actually a lady there with sort of like short hair like my mum. I don't think she was part of like my, the lot that knew my mum. I think she may have been someone that worked there, but she was wearing the exact same jumper that my mum had, and from behind it looked like my mum. And I sat there, I was like, quite upset actually, because I thought it was her. I thought she was back. And then also about a year ago, when I first started helping out at a baby group, there was a lady, because my mum dyed her hair red, and there was a lady with red hair, and literally from the behind she looked exactly like my mum. And for a moment I thought she was alive, and then that grief kind of like hit me again. Yeah, it does. And dreams, I've had those. I think for a period after my mum died, I had a lot of dreams where I could see her ill. I was sort of like haunted by these sort of like dreams where she was as ill as she was when she was dying, and I'd wake up and I'd feel like I couldn't kind of escape that reality of what had sort of like happened. And after a period of time, she started appearing in my dreams as well. But I think that was sort of like when my grief was sort of like moving on, and the shock had worn off. And my brother, because I didn't process his death or grieve, I didn't grieve properly being a child. It came out when I was an adult, and it was around the time I turned 26, because he died when he was 26. I actually had a couple of dreams of him around then, and he was just stood there. He didn't say anything. He was just stood there in my dream, is like exactly how I remember him. And I'd wake up feeling like really confused, like, is he alive? It felt like he was alive because he was so real in that dream.
And
things.
did you find that comforting, or do you think it's, I mean, some people believe in spirit and you know, connections that, you know, maybe we don't know everything about. Do you think that is him visiting you in spirit, or do you just think it's your mind's way of coping with that kind of, you know, you knew it was around the time that he had passed, and he was on your mind a lot, or do you think it's a bit of both?
Um, I I don't know how I feel about like a lot of people believe in afterlife, don't they? And our loved ones still watching over us. I've always believed actually death is kind of just death. But a few things have happened, like when my mum died, in my downstairs toilet the day after she died, there was a reflection on the wall from a puddle, sort of like on the little shelf above my sink, and it was a heart, this heart. And then I keep seeing hearts in my bathrooms, like whether it's sort of like a bath bomb the next day forms the shape of a heart. And 2 days after she died, me and my mum's best friend were in my mum's house, because we kept going down to look after my brother and make sure he was okay. Um, we both, at the very same second, we were like, we smell cooking apples, but we both said it at the same time. My mum used to make apple crumble from the cooking apples in her garden, and I've always sort of like been very, I don't believe in ghosts, I don't believe in this, but I've not found a reason for why those things were happening. You could say, oh, it's a beautiful coincidence, but the cooking apples, I don't understand how two different people could smell that at the exact same time in my mum's house. And it's made me wonder a little bit more about, you know, could this be a sign of something? So the answer is I don't know. But with regard to the dreams, I think that's just my mind processing. I think
Mm.
I think it's such loss is so hard. You really can't process it that well, because, you know, how can you process someone being there 1 minute and then the next they're kind of gone? And I think your brain tries to do that over a period of time. And I think the dreams could be your brain's way of processing that death. Um,
I had something really strange happen to me in 2021, February 2021, actually, because my granddad was taken in to hospital, and he suddenly got very, very ill very quickly. And I got an email. So, you know, you get these emails that are just junk. They're just like inviting you, saying that you've won a competition or something like that. Well, this email was from a lady called Cindy. Now, that's, to me, that's not a very common name, and it wasn't in my junk box, it was in my inbox. So most emails like that for me go to my junk box straight away. But this was from someone called Cindy. It was in the subject line, and then when you opened it, it said, if you click on this link, we can contact you further, or something like that. And obviously I didn't click on the link. But my nan's name was Cindy, and she passed away in I think it was 1996, 1995. I can't remember. It was a long time ago. She had leukemia, and I knew after I got that email that Grandad was going to be okay when he passed away, because for me it was comfort. It was like, oh, he's going to be with my nan. You know, it's like, it was almost like a little message saying,
yeah,
you know, she's there, she's watching, she's waiting. And I found that very odd, because obviously
yeah,
emails are a completely new thing, they're new technology, and my nan would have never sent an email in her lifetime. So yeah, it's just very, very strange to get this email. So yeah, I kind of agree with you. There's bits in my mind going, don't be so silly, and then there's other
yeah.
bits going, well, if it's a comfort, who cares? And I do believe in quite a lot of spiritual things anyway, so
Yeah, I've always been quite a spiritual person. I'm not sure if I believe in ghosts. Do I believe in sort of like moving on to a different, that then that's a possibility. But I do believe some things can't be explained. As I said, that seems very specific, doesn't it? And it happened just at sort of like the right time. And as I said, when my mum died and certain things happened, I was so confused. I was like, but this goes against everything I used to believe, you know. So I found a lot of comfort in what I would call my signs. And yeah, but I've got a lot of friends that do believe deeply in sort of like loved ones sort of like giving you signs, and they go to mediums and they find a lot of comfort. I actually had a friend recently go to a medium, and she came away saying, I don't know how he knew everything that he did. She said there's no possible way that he could have. So there might be something that is sort of like a connection there. Um, that some people are able to feel that a little bit more. But if it brings
Yeah.
people comfort, then it's a good thing.
I mean, how have you, I know we've talked before about this, but obviously having your vaccine injury stuff going on and not having your mum there with you,
Yeah.
how have you coped with that? Because I know it's been very difficult for you.
Not very well, to be honest. When I had that vaccine, became unwell, I had all this stuff going on that I didn't understand. Your automatic sort of like, you know, built in, you just want your mum, don't you? You want to go to your mum because there's that natural nurturing going on there with your mum. I mean, not everyone gets that with their mum, but I was very fortunate to have a really lovely mum. And yeah, it's been very hard this last year because there's some things I just can't tell other people that I would have told my mum. And even when I had that brain tumor diagnosis, I really needed my mum, and even now still really need her. But I have to find comfort in different ways. So I cuddle my children a lot. Like I find a lot of comfort in my children. But it's funny, really, how grief works and needing people. Because I was in my local Sainsbury's yesterday, and I was just going up and down the aisles, and obviously my treatment's starting soon. I just burst out crying in the middle of the aisle. And I couldn't understand why, but it was that I need my mum, I need her comfort, and the only thing I'd say that's kind of got me through it is when we lost my brother, I watched my mum fall apart because that was her son. And then I watched her carry on, and I watched her strength. I watched her ability to get up each day, even though you could visibly see how much that broke her. And then she kind of just poured that love into us. So whenever I'm having these moments, I sit there and think, well, my mum was an incredibly strong lady and she lost her son, and I can get through this without her because she got through so much without, you know, the child that she was longing for. And so I'm drawing her strength to me, and in a way that makes me feel really close to her. So
I think that's the thing. I've been reminded of this quite a few times over the last week. I actually made it to the Taylor Hawkins
yeah.
tribute concert, which was actually really emotional because Taylor Hawkins' children were there, and so were Dave Grohl's children. And his Taylor Hawkins' son actually did come and play the drums on the stage while they sang "My Hero," which, as you can imagine, I don't think there was there were 90,000 people crying in one stadium, I think. But and then, like you say, you know, for me, I look at my children and both of them look so much like their dad.
Yeah.
It's like having mini hymns here all the time. You know, because they're both, my eldest son is nearly the same age as what his dad was when he passed away. So he's 25 and his dad was 27. So they're both coming up to that sort of age, and they look and sound a lot like him. And there is comfort in the fact that your parents pass things down to you, and not just looks but also personality traits and ways of coping, and all the things that you would hope that they would pass down to you. They're there somewhere, aren't they?
Yeah, I think that is sort of like one of the things that helps me carry on and sit there and think, actually, now I'm not in shock. Now some time has gone by. and you probably feel this too, is that actually I can take those bits from the person I love and I'm making that live on. So she to me, my brother and my mum are kind of still here because they're in here, and I won't let that part of them die. So, and then I'm passing that on down to my children. I want them to have those traits. I want them to carry that with them. Because it's the only way to kind of keep them with you, because they never fully go, do they? They're always sort of
Yeah.
like, do you know, there is a lovely book that I read with my children, because when my mum died, my children really, really struggled with that death, because she was sort of like, other than me and my husband, she was the closest person to them. And it was called Badger's Parting Gifts. And it's just this really lovely book talking about when someone dies, you take the gifts of all the stuff they taught you, and you let that live on, and you give that as a gift to someone else eventually. And I think that's a really lovely way of looking at death and loss, and the loss of a loved one. But
Yeah.
in that
Obviously, my
sense,
two were 1 and 7, so
that's
I had the same thing. I had lots of little books. I actually got a lot of things from Winston's Wish,
yeah,
the charity for children that are in grief, and they were great. Um, but yeah, that you take little bits of you are part of your parents, aren't they? Um, and they can come out at surprising moments. But
yeah,
I think the situation that we've all been plunged into with
that's
our illnesses
that's a different kind of grief, isn't it?
is a
It's
different kind of grief, yeah, because you start to grieve what was before as well. So you almost grieve when Vince died. I kind of grieved the loss of him, but I also grieved the loss of future plans that I had in my head that I thought might happen. A bit like I can imagine how you imagined your mum getting older and you looking after her, and all those things that you thought would happen but haven't. And it's the same with when you become chronically ill, you become ill for some reason, you start to grieve what you can't do anymore and what you thought you might be doing in the future.
yeah,
And I think one of the good things is that when you come to a level of acceptance with the loss of someone or a chronic illness, you actually learn to live more in the moment and each day and appreciate everyone around you, because you know that tomorrow those people might not be there.
that's it. Yeah, I think it's been really hard on the vaccine injured in the last year. And to be honest, even when I had mine, and that I suffered all that I did, it was a different kind of grief. But some elements were the same. It was, I'm looking back to how I was before that, and like you said, you look to the future, and it's really hard to get your head around that, because you don't want to be ill. You want to be able to do those things again, and it's hard, and it can be lonely. And this is sort of like another area of grief that I find the vaccine injured have definitely felt. And I definitely felt it after my mum died too, is that no one seems to sort of like turn up. I mean, they may for a little bit, and then all of a sudden it's sort of like, oh, well, you've kind of got to get over that, or you've got to, and you're still left here with, your struggles and your pain. And everyone else is sort of like looking at you like, you should be okay now, you should accept that. But it's not as easy as that. And I think support is hard when something in your life changes, whether that's with your health, and whether that's with the loss of a loved one. And I know that's something that a lot of people in the group have been feeling, is that a sense of abandonment when they need that support. And that is really hard. And it's because we live in a world where, I don't know, it's sort of like, I felt like if it was sort of like not positive, people kind of didn't want to know. They didn't want to know the nitty gritty of the in between. Or if they're watching someone else's pain, then they back away because they start to think, oh well, I could go through that, and I don't want to watch that, I don't want to witness that right now, and then they step away. from that. And I think it's really hard because people need support when something changes in their life and they're going through, you know, a grieving process, or whether it was the life they had before, or the death of someone. So I think there's a
Yeah,
massive disconnection with the world and a grieving person.
I think the good thing that comes out of this is when you collectively find other people going through the similar things to you at the same time, because I know that others on the support groups have lifted me out of some dark places, and I know that's been the same for you. And I do wonder whether how I'd be feeling now if I'd been completely on my own with this and not known what was going on. I think it would have been a lot more scary.
Yeah,
And yeah, I don't know. I don't know what I'd be, where I'd be. I'd probably
yeah.
cope, but yeah, it's made much better when you have others to hold your hand.
I think it's sort of like when something happens to you, you naturally try to seek out the people similar to you. Like I did that after my vaccine when all that stuff started happening. I was like, something's got to be here for me to find and get some support. And I did, I found it. And that was the same when my mum died. I searched and looked for, you know, motherless daughters groups, and I found it. And oh, these people understood me. And when my health changed, I found a group and these people understand me. And actually, that's when people start to heal inside. And I
Mm.
like your little touch on sort of like when you go through stuff like this, it kind of like when you get through the shock and all of that, it kind of like forces you to be in the present moment. Because actually, when you are present, you have gratitude for things, you know, that you would not have had gratitude for had you not been aware of, you know, everything that you are. And I think that's important. But when something goes wrong, whether it's you're sort of like bedbound or, you know, anything else, you could wake up each day and there is something to be grateful for, whether it's, oh, I can hear the birds today. That's actually a really beautiful thing to be able to hear. And I know in terms of when it's a physical loss, because I know some people with the vaccines, they have lost people. I sit there and I started waking up each day after my mum died thinking, wow, I can hear this, I can see this, and my mum can't. I'm going to enjoy that. I'm going to be present right now and think, you know, I will appreciate this because my mum would have appreciated it. And I think when you're more present, you kind of can, you've got the right support and you're present, you can get through that a little bit better and accept.
Yeah, I do as well. It's I think one of the best things that's come out of this is that it's reminded me to be present again.
Yeah,
Um, I did, I was practicing mindfulness for quite a few years, and I don't know. I think maybe the hustle and bustle of life had just,
yeah,
distracted me a little bit from that. But now, obviously, I don't know how I'm going to be from one moment to the next. This morning I woke up with a banging headache and buzzing feet and hands. But I've put some lipstick on and I'm chatting to you, and it's great. I'm enjoying myself. So from one moment to the next,
you're
it
taking
can be
something.
completely different, and
Yeah,
we're just lucky to have people to talk to and share that with.
yeah. I think it's really nice that we've got, when you look in the right places, there is support. I don't know whether you've ever heard of Eckhart Tolle. It's funny that you say about the hustle and bustle of like life. Like I used to practice meditation. I had Eckhart Tolle's sort of like Power of Now book, because this was sort of like years ago. I bought it because I started learning actually it's important to be in the present moment. But then, you know, you get back into your sort of like routine, you kind of become robotic like, and then I look back on myself a couple of years ago and I sit there and think, "Oh, gosh, I really wasn't present." And that's why I was unhappy. And that's why, you know, I struggled with certain things. And back then I thought, you know, not having something not turning up at the door, I thought that was the end of my week, you know, like, oh, my package hasn't arrived. Oh, I'm in a really bad mood from that. I was expecting that, or that got lost, or my children played up today, and that was the worst thing. And now that I am slightly more present, I don't see those things as sort of like big things anymore. I see them as very sort of like tiny, minuscule little things that actually don't really matter that much at all. Um, so I think you can get trapped in this sort of like routine, robotic like, you know, you're not present, and, you know, you can be weighed down by so many things and then when something actually really big does happen and it changes you, sit there and you look back on that and you go, oh wow, it really wasn't that bad back then at all. Um, because once again, it goes back to gratitude and being in the moment, doesn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, it does. Um, just to wrap things up, have you got any funny stories about grief?
Oh gosh.
I know you don't put fun and grief in the same
No.
sentence normally, but
No. I mean, there was something funny that my mum did. Um, that happened obviously when she was alive, and then like I think it was sort of like it must have been before the first lockdown, and I saw it as a sign because we go back to those signs. My mum was a really bad driver, and so when she came up once, I think it was 2018, I went to Smith's toy store in, because I live in Southampton, that's sort of like Hedge End. There's a toy store there called Smith's, and at the end of the car park there is a Burger King. So we'd come out the store and I'd look down and I was on my phone. And when I next looked up, my mum was going through the drive-through backwards. So she had gone through, she thought that was the way out. She thought going through the drive-through where everyone comes out, she thought going in there was going to get her out of the car park. I don't know why. And I remember saying that at her funeral, because I did her eulogy and I wanted, you know, people to remember the funny things that mum did. But then I think it must have been about a month after she died, I looked, you know, I sat there in my sadness and my mourning and crying. And the one thing that did make me laugh and I thought was funny is that there was, I think, a vehicle, like a delivery, there was something in Hedge End in that car park, and it went through that same Burger King drive through the same way my mum did. So, and that's when I was like, oh, this is, you know, this brightened my day a little bit. So it wasn't exactly to do with my grief, but it made the grief a little bit better. And I thought, okay, at least my mum was not the only person that did that. I thought she was the only person that could do something like that. I found that funny. Have you got anything?
I've got several. When my dad died, on his funeral, because my dad died very suddenly as well. He had a heart attack in 2016, and I was actually there when he died because it was in the middle of the night. My mum called me at the same time as a paramedic, so I shot down to my mum's house. So I was there at the time. And fast forward a few weeks to his funeral, and I'd helped my mum arrange most of the funeral because obviously she wasn't up to it. And my dad was a very tall man, and very tall. And my mum had ordered a plain rosewood coffin for him. And at the time, I think in grief, you know, she had very specific things she wanted. So she wanted this plain rosewood coffin. And day of the funeral, my dad had, I think we had 200 or 300 people turn up. It was literally the whole crematorium was packed. And we had 4 family cars as well. So it was quite a somber kind of morning, turning up there and just seeing the whole cemetery lined with my dad's family and friends. And I got out the car and mum and I stood either side, you know, and it was quite upsetting. People were coming up to us and giving us cuddles and things like that. And then the hearse arrived with my dad in it just behind. And they started taking the coffin down to the crematorium, and we were all following. And my mum's nudging me in the ribs, and I'm going, "You're right, mum," around her. And she said, "Charlotte, it's not your dad." And I said, "What do you mean, mum?" She's going, "Look at the coffin, look at the coffin." So I'm looking at the coffin and I'm thinking, I don't. She's going, "For starters, it's got roses engraved on the side of the coffin. And I didn't order one with roses." She's going, "It's not long enough. Your dad was taller than that." So I had my mum literally like nudging me throughout the service, going, I don't think that's your dad in there."
Really? Oh, so funny.
Another time was when my cat died. Might seem silly, but this was a little adopted cat that I'd raised since he was 2 weeks old. So I pipette fed him milk. His mum got run over, and I was really close to this little cat, and he got run over, and I was absolutely devastated. I shut up my business as soon as I heard. I shut my business and I walked 10 miles in the rain. That's how sad I was.
Oh,
And anyway, again, fast forward on a few weeks, and I get a call to go and pick up his ashes from Pets at Home. So I park up at Pets at Home, and I'm crying in the car, and I'm a right state. I'm trying to make myself look less of a state to go in and pick up these ashes. Anyway, I pick them up and I bring them out to the car, and I'm there. Like, I can't drive yet because I'm just crying too much and in a bit of a state, and I'm just holding the box. And suddenly I get this, I'm like, you know, real proper ugly crying. Suddenly I get this call from Pets at Home. So I answer it, and they say, "We're ever so sorry. We're so sorry, but we appear to have given you the ashes of someone else's pet. You need to come back." So I'm there, I'm going, "You're not even Fred, are you? You're not even Fred."
oh no, but you can take, you look back on that and it's quite funny. Yeah. It's funny how these little moments happen, isn't it, after a loss of some sorts. But they keep you going. You've got to find some humor, haven't you, in something. Um and I kind of just want to say to anyone that's sort of like going through a loss of some sorts, whether that's a person, your health, a divorce, because it's all the same, is that actually it may feel really painful right now, but to keep holding on, because there will be little rays of sunshine and you'll be able to grab those. And